Hello, readers, and welcome back to another story time. This week, we are going to read Eat My Dust, Henry Ford's first race. And it's written by Monica Colling and illustrated by Richard Waltz. Okay, so the first part of our title is a phrase that we use when we are having a race. So if we are racing somebody, and we can race someone with a car or with a bicycle or scooter or kickboard, or we can just run and race, right? So this eat my dust means that person is behind you, and because you're going fast, the friction from the thing you're driving or riding or your feet is making dust go up into the air. And if the person is behind you, then the dust you're making is going into their face. So they have to eat your dust. So that's what that phrase means. And then we see Henry Ford, and Henry Ford is a person. And this is a real person who really lived a long time ago. So during that time, there were many inventors of different cars, and he was one of these inventors. And he invented and created the car brand that we know today as Ford. Okay, so maybe this story is a true story. So I think this will be a true story about Henry Ford. But before we read, so this person who's on the car, that is probably Henry Ford. And you may not know it, but what he is on, so that was what one of the first cars looked like. And is that what cars look like now? No way. So now cars go much, much faster. And so if they look like that, it would be quite dangerous. But when cars first came out, they didn't go very fast. And then down in the corner at the bottom, there's somebody also driving a car behind him. So maybe he had a race with somebody. What do you think? Do you think Henry Ford had a race with someone? I think we have to read to find out. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Henry Ford liked to drive. He liked to drive into town. People got excited when they saw him. So here's Henry Ford driving his car. Yeah, it looks very simple, right? Yeah. And do you think he drove this car on a rainy day? Or when the roads were muddy? Maybe not, right? There's no roof. There is that crazy Henry Ford driving his horseless buggy again, they said. Ladies ran for the sidewalk. Men leapt for cover. Dogs barked. Horses reared. Henry liked driving into town. So here in the car, he's driving the car on the road, right? And they called it the horseless buggy because most people during that time, if they had money, they had a buggy with a horse because horses can be expensive. They're expensive to care for, to house and to feed and to take care of. So only wealthy people had them. But nobody had a motorized car or a motorized buggy. So that's why they call it the horseless buggy, the buggy without the horse. What else we see in this is everybody is jumping out of the way, right? So the ladies go for the sidewalk, the men dive out of the way, dogs bark, and the horses rear up. So it means they get on their back legs. Because during this time, roads that we know today are for cars, right? So only the car uses the road. The sidewalk is for everything else. But during those times, the road was for everybody. So the people walked in the road, the animals walked in the road, and then as cars became popular, cars used the road. So everybody was using the road. Henry had built his car by himself. It ran on gas. It did not have brakes. Henry stopped his car by turning off the engine. Then he jumped out. That sounds scary. So brakes are what we use to stop something from moving. So if you have a bicycle or a scooter or a kickboard, you know that they have brakes on them because if we're rolling, we have to stop it somehow, right? But what did he stop it? No, because he couldn't stop his car. So he would just turn off the engine, maybe wait for the car to stop moving, and then he would jump out. Henry tied his car to a post, just like a horse, so it would not roll away. So remember, his car has no brakes, so it would be maybe easy for it to roll away, especially if he's parked on a hill. Everyone wished Henry would go back to driving a horse and buggy. But Henry loved cars. He loved driving them, and he loved building them. Other people were building cars too. Their cars cost a lot of money. They always needed repairs. So repairs means they need to be fixed. Since most people did not know how to drive, car owners hired drivers. Only the rich could afford to own a car. So also, just like with horses and buggies, so the fancy horses and buggies were only owned by people who had a lot of money. And same thing when cars were first made. Cars were extremely expensive, and most people didn't know how to drive. So, since rich people could afford to buy the car, they could also afford to pay somebody to drive them everywhere they needed to go. Henry had a dream. He wanted to build a car everyone could own. Henry needed money to build his dream car. How could he get it? He decided to enter a race. Henry had never raced a car in his life. So, what does Henry want to do? Henry doesn't just want to build any car. He wants to build what kind of car? A car that only rich people or wealthy people can own? Or a car that everyone could own? Yeah, so he wants to make a car that everyone can own. But he needs what? What does he need to make it, to help make his dream come true? He needs money, right? So he needs money so that he can buy the things he needs and maybe pay people to help him make it. And where does he think he can get this money from? So if he enters a race. So a race is when we have a competition. So a competition between at least two things or two people. You can be driving something, or it can be just you using your legs. Car racing was a new sport. People dressed up for a day at the races. They cheered the fastest car to victory. If I win the race, Henry told his wife, Clara, I will be able to build my new car. So if you win the race pays money to the winner. Henry and a mechanic named Spider Huff went to work. They put a 26 horsepower engine in their race car. 1 horsepower equaled the pulling power of 1 horse. That meant Henry's car could beat any horse in seconds flat. People laughed at Henry. You'll never beat the daredevil, they said. The daredevil was Alexander Winton. He was the American racing car champion. I can beat him, said Henry. My car is built better. Clara nodded. She wanted only one thing. She wanted Henry to drive safely. The races were held at a track near Detroit, Michigan. Henry entered the 10-mile race. The prize was $1,000. 8,000 people filled the stands that day. So $1,000 might not sound like a lot of money now, but 100 years ago, that was a lot of money. The 10-mile race was the last race of the day. Henry and Winton were the only racers on the track. So there's only 2 people who are going to race. One is Winton, and the other is Henry. The daredevil smiled at Henry. He tipped his hat. Henry tipped his hat and smiled back. On your marks, shouted the starter. Henry gripped the steering wheel. Start your engines. Spider cranked the engine. Henry's racers roared to life. So Spider is his mechanic, so the person who helps him work or fix his car. And these cars, or at least this car that Henry Ford has, he doesn't start it inside. Somebody has to crank it in front first. So you have to crank it to get the motor to start. There's no key or no button to push. Bang! The starter's pistol went off. Henry and Winton shot down the track. The crowd cheered. Most were cheering for Winton. They were sure he would win. So Winton seems to be a popular racer. Maybe he's raced before, so many people know him. I think the other people don't know Henry Ford as a racer. The 2 cars raced side by side. Up ahead lay the first curve. Winton was a pro. He knew how to drive around a bend without slowing down. Henry did not. He had to cut the engine. So cut the engine means to turn it off. Then he made a slow, wide turn. And unless Henry Ford made a change, remember, Henry Ford's car doesn't have brakes. So it must be really difficult for him to slow down and stop the car. The only way he can do that is to turn off or cut the engine. "Lean out!" shouted Henry. Spider stood on the running board. He leaned out. Henry took the curve. Spider's weight kept the racer from tipping over. So if they take the curve too fast, the car can tip over. But Henry Ford has his driving partner, Spider, and using the weight of Spider's body helped to keep the car from tipping over when they went into the curve. Winton was ahead. Henry stepped on the gas. So the gas is the name for the pedal that makes the car go. He sped down the track. His car caught up with Winton's. The cars raced around the track 5 more times. The racers were on their last lap. The finish line was in sight. Suddenly, black smoke covered the track. Henry could not see. Was his car in trouble? Was the engine overheating? So overheating means if the engine is getting too hot. Because the engine, what's happening inside the engine is making a fire inside. So the gas goes into the engine, and then a fire makes little tiny explosions in the engine, and this helps give the power. So that creates a lot of heat. Was the race to build his dream car over? So Henry thinks that maybe his car is in trouble, right? No, Winton's car was in trouble. It was burning oil. Suddenly, the engine stalled. So that means the engine stopped. Winton's car rolled to a stop. Henry roared past in a cloud of dust. "Yippee!" he shouted with glee. So did Henry win? Yes. He got lucky. It seems if Winton's car didn't break down, then he would have lost. But Henry got lucky. Winton's car was in trouble and it broke down and it stopped running. So Henry Ford won the race. The crowd went wild. Men threw their hats in the air. Women stood on their chairs to get a better view. Henry had won his first car race. Henry Ford was the new American racing car champion. The next day, Henry's name and picture were in all the newspapers. He had won the money. How much money was it? Do you remember? $1,000. He had also won a beautiful crystal punch bowl. Clara placed the bowl on the table for visitors to see. Henry built his dream car. He called it the Model T. It came in one color, black. The Model T was easy to drive. It was easy to repair. People loved it. They called it the Tin Lizzie. So this car looks a lot different than the other one, right? And at least this one has a canopy, some type of roof. That way, so if it rains or if the sun is out and it's hot, it can protect you, right? Henry Ford drove his Tin Lizzie into town. People got excited when they saw him. Ladies waved, men honked. Henry was happy. He had built a car everyone could own. And that is the end of our story. So, yeah, this is a true story about a man named Henry Ford who wanted to make a car that everyone could drive and everyone could learn to drive easily. And one thing that made his car unique was if it's easier to drive, then more people could drive it. But if it's difficult to drive, then would it be easy for everyone to drive it? No. Okay, that is the end of our story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, bye bye.